Facebook too, so I don't know if I'll get any people from Facebook. Okay. Woo. Let me go ahead and do my intro as I'm learning how to switch the screens. But welcome to part 2 of my reaction to the Vice education panel. I'm actually more excited for part 2 because we go into the critical race theory stuff, which is really my wheelhouse. We had spent, at this point in the conversation, we had spent 2 hours talking about LGBTQ stuff. Remember, this is an education panel, and we spent 2 hours talking about LGBTQ stuff. And I was ready to move on, but I was also very tired. They had us on these very hard seats. And at this point, I was just kind of annoyed with being in the room. But it was we were having a really good conversation. No crazy outbursts. I don't know if you guys all saw the feminist panel that Vice did, but that was a crazy panel. And I was actually supposed to be on that panel originally. They called me and they wanted me to be on the Vice feminist panel. But then as they got to know me and who I am, they actually decided to put me on the education panel. I kind of wish I was on the Vice feminism panel now that I look back at how things were edited, because I think it would have been just more fireworks. And I would have been there because they were so into like, I am a Black feminist and you don't understand because you're a white woman. And it turned into like, so I could have been like the Black not feminist there and just checked them. But then they might have said I'm not Black, like the people have said in this. But anyways, I ended up on the education panel, which actually is more important because it's the education of our nation's children. It's our future. We're going into part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, it is on my YouTube. You can watch that, but we're going into part 2. And of course, I have my really good friend, Kiana, here with me. Say hi to Kiana.
Hello.
Q is here. And she is she's a Vice debate expert. I have not watched all of the Vice debates. She is more into watching them. I think they're kind of boring.
I love them.
For them. I just don't. But anyways, I drool when I talk, so just get used to that. And and so yeah, she's a Vice debate expert, and also I love having someone to bounce off of with this stuff. Mm-hmm. So please make sure that you stay with us and watch this, because I would love to share what I actually said on this, because they heavily edited me. A lot of my statements, they said that they let me have the beginning and the end, and they edited out the whole middle while they let the people on the left have their full statements. I think they really wanted to get some narratives out of me, and you can see it in the comments that the people totally bought it. And that's really in the second half, a lot of these edited statements. So let's go ahead and get into it. Thank you so much for being here. And just so you know, Q, we've got 113 people watching right now. So
great. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell, guys, for all these videos.
Or just subscribe when you see my crazy satire characters. That's how most people found me. Okay, let's get into it. And how is the audio, everyone? Just let me know in the comments if it's popping. Last time I was getting too close to the mic and it was sounding funky, but
might bump into someone who maybe comes from a different background than you, has a different ideology than you. What do you lose if you homeschool and then you're not putting yourself in these kind of situations?
What you lose is negative influences. One of the biggest things I think when it comes to homeschool is keeping my kids away from your bad kids. We've went and taken our children to pride parades. And you know what I mean? We've been there, we've been loving, and we showed support to the people there. But at the same time, we explain our views on the matter, that we believe marriage is between a man and a woman. And from experience and talking to people, I understand that a lot of people who choose that lifestyle, it is based on trauma. A lot of were molested or sexually assaulted as children. So I don't think it's okay for me to teach to my children that this is something normal we ought to accept when it doesn't.
Sorry, I have to change the... This is my amateur hour. Here we go.
Oh, the screen.
You were hearing Phil. You were hearing
society.
Phil.
We would not be able to procreate if everybody were to choose that lifestyle. So I think it's okay for me as a parent to say, hey, this exists, that exists, but this is our view on it, and this is how we want to present it to them.
Do you think it's somewhat problematic?
Wow. So Phil, who is my friend that actually came on the panel now, let me tell you this. Vice, when they called me to be on this panel, they were like, do you know anybody else to be on it? And I'm like, don't you guys like do your research? This happened with me with another show that I was on, where they actually had me find people for them to be on the panel. That probably shows how they probably had a huge pool of people on the left to be on the panel. And then like a small pool, and they actually interviewed me. I gave like maybe 5 names, and they interviewed all of them, and they chose Phil to be on the panel. And he got so much heat for that statement. First of all, saying marriage is between a man and a woman, right? Like there were so many things out here that in his statement, or that you could choose to be gay, choose to be straight, and then that he took his kid to pride parades, but then teaches them that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that he doesn't want his kids to be around your bad kids. And this is interesting, because if there were glass walls in public schools, if you got to see as a parent everything that went on in a public school, you would be like, I think even the most left-leaning parent would be like, no, I don't want my kids there. But because it's closed doors, you don't see what's happening the day. Your kid doesn't really give everything that's going on in the day, especially in middle school and high school. The administrators hide from you all of the incidents that happen on campus. We still think our schools maybe are a good influence on our kids, maybe a neutral influence on our kids. But he's saying, no, I don't want you to be I don't want my kids to be in those schools, because I don't want the kids that are a bad influence on my own children. And we all know that can happen. I happen to be. Yeah. I met some bad kids, and it changed my life. Like,
it's so interesting, because it's usually that's the way it goes. Like if you're going to get influenced, it's the bad influencing the good, and not vice versa. 9 times out of 10.
Yes. And I actually I don't have kids of my own, but I did help to raise my godkids. My friend, she's got 7 kids, and they've lived with me on and off. They're now teenagers and older. But when they were younger, they were living with me at times. And when my goddaughter was living with me, she was so happy and fun. And then as soon as we started school, especially public school, and taking her to school every day, she had to like shut down. She was like a different person, because she had to put on this shell when she went to school. And it was a different school because she was living with us, but it was different from where she was before when she was living with her mom. And she was just like a different girl. And I was like, what happened to my sweet goddaughter? Now she's just this angry, and she's having to deal with all this drama at school, and girls putting her down and being mean to her. So there's a lot of truth in that. And I can't believe that he was getting hate in the comments for wanting to protect his children from bad influences. Isn't that what parents are supposed to do?
Yeah, but see, they don't consider it a bad influence. That's where it's hard, because we end up talking past each other sometimes as, conservative and liberal, because like they don't see it as bad. They're upset with us because we see it as bad. And it's so difficult to have that conversation, because we just don't agree.
No, we don't. But I can't even tell you how many times I have been contacted by parents who have said, I regret not homeschooling my kids. I regret letting them they have changed. There are some parents that I know personally, their kids don't even talk to them anymore, because they became so on the left, especially once they went to college, that their children think they're bigoted and white supremacist, and they don't want to talk to them anymore. So there is something to be said about protecting your children from these environments, and no one should be shamed for doing that. Let's keep going.
That you're going like, well, this is our viewpoint, that marriage is between a man and a woman because we can't move society forward with gay couples. Like, we have factually proven that incorrect. I can actually tell you that gay parents on average make exceptional parents and do exceptional things with kids, because they adopt, and they only adopt kids when they are financially capable, which actually makes kids of gay parents actually more successful and academically competent. So gay parents actually are very good at moving society forward, and we have the statistics to prove
Could that be a long-term solution, though, if a large population chose to choose that lifestyle? There would be no children to adopt.
No one is choosing this lifestyle.
That's an opinion.
Okay,
it's not an opinion. It's just.
Okay, sorry.
Did you choose to be straight, sir?
I've been teaching for 15 years.
So
and
have I.
will say that there is some kids now that are going for that community that are doing it not out of a genuine, and there's pockets of them too. Like you'll notice like friend groups of girls that will all of a sudden decide that they're now trans.
The idea of LGBTQ being trending, and the idea of teaching kids that being gay is a choice, those are two very different.
So I'll answer that. Yes, I chose to be straight. Absolutely.
So
okay, this was probably like our most heated moment in the whole. We were such a nice panel. But yes, it is absolutely trending right now. These kids we locked down our schools, we shut down our schools, and our school day in California turned into you're only there, you only have to log in for 3 hours a day. And if then the lessons were shorter, easier, and TikTok became a huge phenomenon. If you go to TikTok, there's accounts that are literally just about someone's gender identity. The whole account is, I am a non-binary, and every single video is about their non-binariness, and they're getting like 500,000 views. So to say that there isn't, and I'm glad that Lipstick Desmond admitted that there is a trend. But what is it a trend leading towards? Do we really want our kids to be getting into that lifestyle as a trend? What do you think of that, Q?
Well, the thing about it is too, is what's interesting is this kind of started, this is almost like, so we grew up in the 90s. So in the 90s, in girlfriend groups, this is like the new anorexia, right? Like that was a social contagion. And when we were growing up in the 90s was anorexia. And now it tends to be, especially in girl groups. There was a great book that Abigail Schreier wrote. I don't know why the title is leaving my mind right now, but she wrote a really excellent book that was not like condemning, the trans community, nothing like that. It was just a book that was basically just investigating, like, why is this happening in these young girl groups right now? And that book got banned from Target. It got banned off of Amazon. And it was not really like a, subjective, like, criticism of the transgender community. It was really just asking the question, like, why is this happening? And that's where the trend is happening right now, is with these young girls. And it was happening before COVID, and COVID just made it so much worse because, like you said, the influences of TikTok came in, and the stress, and it just made things that were already trending in such a bad direction 20 bajillion times worse. Like they were so primed to be just pushed into this crazy next direction.
Yeah, exactly. And it's unfortunate because they cut out when I talked about detransitioning and how that is. So when you come out as trans or non-binary, that's celebrated, right? It's like, wow, you get all this attention. But then when you come out as detransitioning, you are shunned. You are shunned by that community. And there's a lot, and it's actually a lot of young women that are coming out, and I mean, heartbreaking videos of them detransitioning and going through and permanent damage to their bodies, permanent damage. And I mentioned this in the Vice panel, and they cut that out. So that's what if you guys want to know what's been cut out, when we were talking about kids detransitioning, and the teacher that was, I think the teacher's trans, they didn't share the pronouns. So it's, sorry if I mispronoun her, you guys can't violate me because she didn't share her pronouns. Well, they did in the beginning, but it's not in the video. So, and all of us conservatives did not share our pronouns. That was like how we found out right away who was on which side. And so anyways, this teacher, like, you could see that she didn't want to address the detransitioners. And those kids have a voice too. Those kids have a voice too. And we're doing permanent damage to these children. So let's keep going.
I just think about the kids who are, because you got to think about it. If it's like a contagion, right? They're socially transitioning before they, would medically transition, obviously. So if you're basically just kind of doing what everybody else is doing, especially in these young girl groups, young girls are very much more, let me do what my friends do, than boys do it too. But I feel like young girls, growing up a young girl, I mean, we can attest to it. Like, we are just very influenced by our friends, especially socially. So if these girls are transitioning socially, but it's a social contagion. They're not actually transitioning. So then eventually when they wake up, like, if you try to detransition, even just socially, like, I can't imagine how it is for them in their friend groups or in their school, like, in general. It's got to be so frightening for them when it dawns on them, like, this isn't really me. Like, I was just doing this because it was, like, popular. And now I've got to undo it.
And let's not forget how much we've all changed since we were teenagers. I'm like a completely different person.
Totally different.
Thank God.
Exactly.
Right. Let's keep watching.
Don't forget to switch the video or the stream.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about it?
You could be attracted to me if you wanted to be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
And let me explain. I have seen transgendered people who I thought were born female that were very attractive. I didn't know. Now, once I find out that that's not what you are, I am choosing not to pursue that. That's what I mean. So yes, you can be attracted to someone that is of another gender.
Let's talk about what do you
Poor Phil, man. He is such a strong alpha male. Thank God for that.
Yeah,
Because they were
that was
like,
a really
oh,
interesting point, though.
he's low-key gay, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, dude, guys, have you seen some of these trans women? I would say trans men, they're not quite pulling it off yet. But there are some trans women that are pulling it. And part of it is, I think we've had trans women as models for a while now. Because that's the body type. It's this thin, tall. You have to be like 5'9", 5'10".
And the bone structure.
Strong bone structure. And like, I think they found some like, I don't know, random European people that are really tall and really good, and men, women, like thin, and they've been models. They've been sneaking them in for a while now because they have that type. So I can understand. I mean, it's crazy to me that people will give you hate for being honest. Like big up to Phil. Like, all right, let's keep going.
What do you think should be taught about gender identity in school? What do you think is being taught?
I want to go back to something you were saying earlier that's related to this about like you're seeing trends, and I am too, right? Last semester when I was teaching, I had a trans kid in every classroom, and I was like, whoa, when I started teaching,
it was one in school.
There was none, right? And I'm like, this is wow.
And they were really for it too. They like went for it.
And I'm hearing you that is something I'm seeing too in the classrooms. Fair. Okay. Now, I'm not going to presume to be in the heads of those kids and to understand like what's real for them or whatever, but I will tell you this, historically speaking, a disproportionate number of kids who are gay, who are trans, who are any of the LGBTQ, I fill in the letters, right? Didn't live to see adulthood. Maybe that's why we don't have an older generation of trans adults, because
I attended a funeral of a trans student last month.
A lot of them didn't make it. And so
okay.
It's so manipulative.
Yes, so manipulative. For one, even in the most inclusive and accepting societies, LGBTQ, especially trans, have a higher rate of suicide.
Yep.
Secondly,
and it's exponential compared to the rest of the population.
Secondly, in my classroom, maybe there was some kid that was questioning their gender. I don't know. I never really asked them that. I didn't have those types of conversations with my students. But you can show that you care for your students and that you're there for your students without making sure that you're going out of your way to affirm their gender identity and sexuality. And I really want to imagine, it's scary to me to imagine what types of conversations this teacher's having with their students one-on-one, because she feels she's like she's their savior. Like she's going to be the reason why a trans student isn't going to commit suicide or something like that. And the other thing about this is, if the kid is that disturbed, if the kid is so disturbed that if they don't get a double mastectomy, they're going to commit suicide, they've got bigger issues than hating their own body. That is some major issues. That's like very immature, for one, because have patience, have patience. Like you have to have them cut off right now, or you're going to commit suicide, or you're going to, cut yourself and stuff like that's just you're I mean, there's people that are overweight and they don't like their body and they're unhappy. They're not going to go kill themselves because they can't, you have to be patient if you want something. And if they really want this thing, they committing suicide and using that as a threat, or using that as I'm so suicidal because I hate my body and I'm not looking like a boy like I want to. That's really messed up. Like you're very emotionally immature. You have a low EQ, because we always have things in our lives that we don't like that we have to cope with. And if you can't cope with that and you want to kill yourself, and yet these teachers are coming in like, I'm going to save you by affirming your gender or whatever. That child is not getting the emotional support that they need.
No, but this is the same tactic they use on parents with kids who are either truly struggling, because I do actually think there's kids that are truly struggling, and then kids that are just doing it as a social contagion. I think both things are happening simultaneously. But this is what they do to parents. They make them so scared that they're going to lose. Would you rather have a daughter or a dead son? It's like, it's so manipulative when they say stuff like that, because that's not even the case. I think there's some study out, and I wish I knew how to cite it because I know it's out there, but it basically showed that some crazy percentage, I want to say it was above 70% of kids who were left to just continue through their pubescent years ended up reconciling it for themselves and just continued on with their actual gender that they had when they were born.
Yep. And I really like this comment. Taking hormones is affecting their minds as well. Duh. Like, I mean, it's
Absolutely.
true. Yeah, it's a great comment. But like, I've
Yep.
taken hormones in my life when I was younger, and they used birth control, and I
Yep.
went crazy. Like,
Yep.
I did not like myself on hormones. So imagine
Yep.
what it's doing to these children to be put on puberty blockers. And then
Yeah.
there's puberty blockers, which is basically just, it doesn't stop your puberty. It just makes it so that it slows it down. You're eventually going to go through it. But what happens is these kids are so scared of going through puberty because they're going to start growing breasts and they actually think they're a boy or whatever. And so they put them on puberty blockers to buy them time so they can like figure out what they're going to do about their gender affirming care. And a lot of this stuff is being paid for by our insurance companies and by our Medicare and Medi-Cal. Like, that's a whole nother discussion. And then once they decide they're going to do the trans thing, then they're put on hormones. And that really affects with your mental health. Hormones really affect your mental health. So think
about it too. They're probably also on antidepressants or an anxiety medication all at the same time. So you've got so many different pharmaceuticals like in your body. And a lot of these kids, because they've been struggling with things for a while. You know, a lot of these kids have like things that have been going on since way early. And a lot of them are on medication really early. So I can only imagine that some of these medications to treat their depression or whatever it is that is not helping anything.
Exactly.
When I hear about kids like feeling comfortable enough to try expressing something where maybe they wouldn't be able to do in other spaces. And I understand that maybe that's not what you want for you.
Gosh, so she just said kids can feel comfortable expressing themselves in my space that they wouldn't in other spaces. Like, right there, already red flag.
So dangerous.
Said in part 1, would you be okay with your kid going over to a neighbor's house and being like, we explored gender identity at my friend's house with the parents? Everyone would be like, no, you're never going over there again. And here's this teacher who feels so emboldened and so empowered to do this with other people's children. When her job, I don't know what type of teacher she was. I think she was a history teacher, is to teach history. Stop all the other stuff. Like, it's crazy to me.
Yeah.
Your kids, but I'm thinking about the most marginalized and vulnerable people. And unfortunately, statistically, for our queer youth, disproportionately, they fall in that category.
Mind you, with the whole concept of school choice, I'm all for parents who agree with what you're teaching, sending their children to you. I just think ultimately it should be within the parent to make that choice.
What do you think should be taught in sex ed?
I think it should be health education, yes. I taught middle school and high school, and they started giving it to my students in 7th grade. And I have students come back to me traumatized because I think sex ed has gone away from what it was. There are some lessons, like, for example, they have a lesson where the kids in 3rd grade in the New Jersey curriculum, there's a picture of a woman's spread eagle, and they're learning all the different body parts of the clitoris and the stuff. Every child is different. Some are not developing.
Okay, they edited me right there. They edited me. All of a sudden, every child is different, right? So in that New Jersey curriculum, they have a spread eagle picture of a woman, and it's really crass. And I wish I don't even want to post it because it's just a crass version.
Is it illustrated or is it a real woman?
It's not a real woman. It's illustrated, right?
Okay.
It's just spread eagle. I mean, I've seen pictures of like a drawn out vagina or whatever that didn't look crass, right? And it's 3rd grade too. But they also in that curriculum tell the children that there are spots there where you can feel pleasure. And
that's where it crosses the line.
Yeah, pleasure-based. And I kept talking about pleasure-based sex ed, which is coming into our schools where they're teaching kids how to have, there's teaching about, anatomy, teaching about safe sex. Okay, but then now they're going into how to make it feel good. How to feel good. And they edited that out when I said that on this Vice debate.
That's really important.
They jumped because they wanted to paint a picture that I was against sex ed. And I am against. I don't think it's appropriate for 3rd grade teachers to talk about girls about the body parts of their vagina. And the other thing is, whatever happened to people learning about all these things on their own and from their friends? Because that's where I learned a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, because it's true. We can't always say that the parents will do it because we know there's like some really crappy parents out there. Like, fair enough. But, I think part of my problem too is that it's like, I don't know, it all seems to tie back to this sexual liberation movement that started back in what, the 60s and 70s, right? I feel like that's all that it is. It's like all about, you know, free sex, pleasure sex, all this stuff, which then, of course, if you're teaching pleasure-based sex, that leads you right into people being convinced that abortion is the right answer. It's like, it's all tied together. People don't see those connect, but it's all the same problematic thing.
Yeah, it's really, really frustrating to me that, and oh, the other thing is that our educational system, especially in blue states, they actually don't teach the sex ed. They bring in Planned Parenthood to teach the sex ed. They did that in my district. They would pay Planned Parenthood something like, it was like $700 a day at least for these Planned Parenthood educators to come in and do the sex ed for 2 weeks. And they were the trained professionals, and they would show them videos. I'll do a full post on this, but they would show them videos of scenarios of like a lesbian couple talking about how they're ready to take it to the next level and what they're going to do with each other, like what acts they're going to do with each other. And they're like stroking each other, or it's like two dudes that are talking about how one dude is like, yeah, I really want to try just not having a condom this time. And blah, blah, blah. And these are videos they're showing our
minors.
Yeah, exactly. Now, again, if you had a neighbor doing this with your child, you would call the police. But yet, because it's a teacher, it's a trained professional, that's totally allowed. And like I said, and by that time, your kids in high school, if they want to learn about the nuances of gay sex, which is what they're teaching kids now, they're teaching them the nuances of like all the different things that you can do in gay sex, in these pleasure-based sex ed curriculums. They can look it up on YouTube or whatever. It's everywhere. They can go to Vice even. Vice has some nasty stuff on it.
Yeah, nasty.
So it's like, it's ridiculous to me that they feel like parents are outraged about this, and that teachers are allowed to do this with our nation's children and be cheered on. And those of us that are speaking against it are booed and told that we're wrong and closed-minded and bigoted, that we're not letting our kids have these sexual conversations. And they edited a lot of what I said about that in this Vice debate panel. It's really
too, I learned something really interesting. I want to say I'm 99.9% sure this came from Matt Walsh's documentary, What is a Woman, which is so fantastic anyways. But like the end of it, they got into the history of the sex ed curriculum, period. The guy that paired with the education system to introduce sex ed to America's kids, John Monet, I think his name is look that man up. It is horrifying what that guy is about. All about pedo stuff. Like he is the champion of the MAPS, what do they call them? Minor attracted persons now. Like all that is coming from this person. And he was instrumental in drafting sex ed for our public education system. That is horrifying to me.
Well, it usually has some sort of creepy origin, that's for sure. All right, let's keep going. I had to get it off this screen because it was like left me on like a crazy face.
Be ready for this or mature enough for it.
I grew up with abstinence education.
That's pretty rough.
Where we didn't talk about sex ed until middle school.
I don't remember saying that's pretty rough there. I don't know if that's from somewhere else. Like it was just inserted in. I don't remember saying that, but and I don't believe her either. She's about the same age as me, if not younger.
Yeah.
I think she's probably the oldest on the panel. I don't believe her that she had abstinence only sex ed. Did she go
maybe
to
at home, not at
did
school?
She go to
no, she went to public school.
There's no public schools doing abstinence only sex ed.
Correct.
In this country right now.
No.
So I don't believe her. I think that maybe she has Christian parents or something and went to a Christian school and that happened. But she needed to be more honest about that.
Yeah.
School, but mostly 10th grade and high school. But I think that middle school is far too late to be talking about sex ed. And it's not because
she wants it earlier.
Oh, I can't.
She wants adults to talk with your kids about sex earlier than middle school. For me, it's happened in 11th grade. That 10th grade was when we had sex ed in
Now, sex ed and health are two different things. They're wanting to merge them into one. Like, yes, you need to sit girls aside earlier. Like, hey, you know what? You're going to be starting your period soon. Like, you have to know, like, I think that that's responsible because not all girls are going to have someone at home telling them about that. I think there is a level of okayness with that. but it's like they're trying to merge health ed and sex ed together, and they're completely two different things taught at two completely different levels of kids.
Yeah, you're right. So Phil's here. He was on the panel. He is the Black guy with dreadlocks that homeschools his 7 kids. And he says, I don't believe most of what she says. She is very disingenuous. His channel is Driscoll TV. So check him out. Give him your support. He is an awesome parent and example for Black America. And he was on this panel with me. Actually, Phil and I prayed together before we did this. And we were praying in the room that, I mean, I think we were quietly like in the room somewhere with everybody else praying. Like we were just, we knew we needed God there with us. And if you look at the comments for this Vice video, that everyone's saying this was the most respectable Vice panel they've ever seen. And I do believe that God was there. I do believe that I think that the left were pacified, because honestly, if they had been rude and super horrible to me, I would have walked out. I would have just been like, I'm not getting paid for this. I'm leaving. Like, especially when it comes to education, like this is such a sensitive topic, our nation's children. I'm not going to let you, be evil to me on, where millions of people are going to watch it and I'm just going to sit there and take it. No, especially when we're living in a free country. It's not communist China. But this conversation was able to be fully had. I'm pretty disappointed in the way Vice edited it, but I do think that a lot of our points, there was a lot of people that said I agreed with some things on both sides, and I'm thinking they're Vice people, and that's a good thing, because Vice people are on the left. So
yeah. You know what I think is interesting too about the age? Our kids are more immature these days. They're less mature, so they're more immature. So we're regressing. So days past, like kids may have been, I don't know. I just look at kids right now, the ones that are like in middle school, they're very immature. So it's like their minds are reverting, but we're speeding up what we're giving their minds. I don't know if there's a connection with that or if there's not, but that being the case, that conflicts. You can't give these children who are really emotionally immature and mentally immature, really mature concepts, because then guess what? They don't know how to process that.
Absolutely. And as someone who has seen the kids from 15 years I taught, and the new generation coming in, especially the kids that were raised on iPhones from when they were like 2 years old. First of all, these kids have been looking at stuff from 8 years old. They've been looking at bad things on the internet. So if you want to, if they just trust me, if you want to make sure these kids know about sex and the ins and outs of sex, a lot of them already do because they've looked at it, right? And now we're just rubber stamping it. Like in this pleasure-based sex ed, they also talk about pornography literacy and how that's totally normal if you're into pornography, and you could be into different types. You might want to experiment with trying to look at LGBTQ pornography. And this is something that's really important to consider, because we haven't lived in a time where it has been so accessible. It is so it is so easy to look at pornography now. And what is that doing to children's minds? Because normally when you're supposed to have sex, you just see the opposite sex. And now these kids are seeing both sides having sex, and maybe they're feeling attraction to both or to one, or they're like, maybe I like the guy and the girl, or feeling aroused by both. And so we're really messing with our children's minds. And this is definitely like last days stuff. The fact that porno was so hard to get your hands on when I was like a teenager. It was like AOL dial-up, and you had to like, it was just like, I remember because I started trying to find it when I was going through my transition and being a sexual being or whatever, and looking up dirty things. And it was so hard to find, and you would get like a virus. And it was just like, I'll never do that. And you'd like, because there's like one computer in the house that's like in the living room. So you like wait till everyone's gone, and you're just like, I'm gonna look up these dirty pictures, right? Ooh, and you feel all like gross or whatever. Now it's just right here. It's just right here. If you would, you could be as addicted as you want to and get it on demand, and our children are getting access to it earlier and earlier. And this is going to, for lack of a better word, F up their minds. Like it's going to really mess them up, and it is messing them up. So it's so dangerous. And now they're getting a rubber stamp for it in their schools. Let's keep going.
I think that second graders are, wanting to be promiscuous, but like having sex ed scaffolded because it is a preventative measure against sexual assault, often being done in the home.
Just because that happens in the home doesn't mean that we need to label all parents as not capable of teaching sex to their children and giving it to teachers.
But teachers, for a lot of children, are the only trusted adults, and it is incredible.
So this is something that if this child's, she is very full of herself, first of all, thinking that teachers are so much safer than parents, because there's a lot of teachers that are very unsafe. They're very unsafe for children to be around. I mean, we just heard in Chicago that there's like over 200 investigations of teachers being inappropriate with children. And this idea that a teacher needs to be the one to always teach these super intimate topics to children is wrong. Especially in elementary school. And yes, there's going to be some kids that are because teachers aren't trained on this. You're not trained on how to deal, especially elementary. In elementary, when I went through, I have my elementary credential and my high school credential, and I got it originally in elementary. We're not trained on how to talk to a child about sex and their body and all of that stuff. I would never do that with my students. Ever. Because first of all, it makes them start doing stuff with each other. They're starting to be like, they're starting to think about it and kind of like think, oh, we talked about sex in the class, so now let's be dirty with each other and do little dirty, nasty, naughty things with each other at school, which happens, by the way, because you kind of you kind of brought that into the classroom. You started bringing that kind of culture into the classroom. Like I just the idea,
it's a slippery slope.
Yes, and this whole like parents are too dangerous. We need to make sure that the trained professionals are the ones that are doing this. It's just, they're not.
It's insane.
They're not trained professionals. Yes, go ahead, Q.
It's insane. It's so crazy. It's not to say that there aren't some teachers out there who catch stuff, right? I know that there was some study that showed like child abuse went up during the lockdown because oftentimes the teachers identified child abuse that was going on. So like there definitely is something to be said. Like there are some teachers out there who see things, they see behavior changes, they see, things that might be going on at home, but to pretend like the teacher is the one who needs to be in charge of like making sure, all of morality is taught to your kids and, identifying the things that you might not be doing right at home. And that's part of the problem is who's defining what's right and wrong right now. That's really problematic. So I think it's just overstepping the lines. And I think your more traditional teachers, a lot of them would feel like they're overstepping the lines by doing that. These newer, younger teachers that have come out of these stupid Marxist colleges, they feel differently. But like you're older, like your generation of teachers, like they're different. And it's changing.
You'll see that all the teachers that are super into like let's teach the kids about multiple genders, they're all under 35.
Yeah.
It's very rare to see someone. I want to just acknowledge the people that are sending super chats. Thank you so much, because this video, because of what we're talking about, will not be monetized. So I'm really appreciative to the super chats and stuff like that. So that I'm new to YouTube. I'm so excited to be able to share my views with you guys and to have you here with me. But I really appreciate all of the support, because this is not easy. This is not, you get a lot of hate. So the support kind of cancels it out and keeps me going. All right, let's keep watching.
Incredibly dangerous to remove teachers who are trained professionals to deal with these crises in the home from the situation.
No, counselors are more trained on that.
Right.
Teachers
the school nurse, maybe.
Teachers are not, the school nurse, the counselors, but teachers are not trained on to deal with child trauma. That's not we get 1 year. We go 4 years of whatever school, whatever BA we decide, and then we get 1 year of teacher training. That's it. We're not trained professionals on how to deal with trauma of kids. What we are supposed to do is to direct them somewhere else and say, okay, if this kid's really messed up, this kid's is acting out weird sexually or whatever, send them to the counselor, send them to the principal, email the parent. But we're not supposed to be the ones to repair this stuff and address this stuff in the classroom and talk with the kid about it. This is just, and she was very much applauded in the comments, like, because she's just the total teacher that's going to be the one that thinks she's so great talking to, Johnny that he wants to become Jamie, and his mommy
She
and daddy
takes
don't
her
like it.
positions on these things as virtue,
Yeah.
100%. Like,
Exactly.
was she a teacher or was she a parent?
She's a teacher, and she's got really beautiful skin, though. I'll give her that.
Yeah,
man.
she's got gorgeous skin. Yeah.
And that's just like a funnel for child abuse.
I think a huge thing that's missing in education in the schools when it comes to sex ed is consent.
Yes.
That's not being taught at all. To my understanding, I never learned it in the schools. And that creates consequences when you look at the situations that are going on here.
I think that we have such a hypersexualized society. Obviously, kids are having sex younger. They're hooking up younger. It's just a reality. I would rather those individuals, and also from a pro-life perspective, know how to have safe sex and preventative sex that prevents pregnancies than them to just go around willy-nilly just doing whatever they want.
So there's a lot of middle schoolers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that are getting pregnant at earlier ages. And we're starting to rank like the highest nationally in terms of middle school pregnancies. And that's because a lot of middle schoolers are, again, like you said, like getting sexually involved earlier, whatever
It's the Cardi B music.
Whatever it is, it's happening. And we need to be able to address it. And students need to be able to be equipped with the skills to understand how to have safe sex. If parents aren't having those conversations at home and middle schoolers are getting pregnant anyways, like why can we not include that in the school so they have some form of information?
You guys could teach middle schoolers about safe sex till your face is blue. They're going to be stupid about it because they're so dumb.
Because they're immature.
They're really immature. Yeah, I taught middle school, and the best thing is to address the issue of this fact that kids are having sex at a younger and younger
Correct.
age. Like, why are we just going past that?
We're just saying like, oh well, like it's gonna happen.
On it. Kids are having sex at 12. Let's just put a Band-Aid on it.
Yeah. And it's like there's no connection. Like people don't. And you know what? CJ has a point. I know. Like I cracked up, and a bunch of people. The people in the comments. People in the comments were dead when he said that. But he has a point. We are introducing such sexualized material to our kids so young now. You cannot tell me there's not a correlation, which is why like. Trying to pretend like introducing them to pornography is like a net positive for society. It is not. It is not. There's a reason why they're thinking about these things. It's because we're putting them in front of their faces all the time, and they're not mature enough to know how to process that. Adults are barely mature enough to know how to process that. It's just wild.
What's interesting is if you look at like the history of just our nation and when children would get married, they actually got married really young. Like back in the day when we only lived like, this is like, I'm taking 1900s, when you only lived like 45 and 70 or whatever, 45, 50, 60, 70 was like, wow, you're ancient. Children, teens were getting married like at 19, 20. What's wrong? What's happening now is the promiscuity. That's what's getting
right. They were committed relationships.
Yeah, exactly. So now what's happening is multiple partners and all of this stuff. And that is, and this sex ed, the way we're teaching it now is actually contributing that and normalizing that.
Correct.
And we have to go back to the drawing board, because what are we going to do? We're going to let this keep steamrolling? What is it going to be? Pretty soon it's going to be 8-year-olds that are the average age for when they start getting sexually active. And we're just going to be like,
right.
we need to make sure. Let's make sure we teach them about it because they're having sex at 8. Like, and these poor children, because can we extend the life of them being children for as long as possible?
Please.
Yes.
This is my problem with like progressives. Like there's never, the problem with progressivism, it's never enough. And that's like so problematic for me, because they look at, when we talk about, oh, well, we had better social values and family values and all these things back 50, 60 years ago. I'm sorry, but that's just the truth. Like we had better social values. And when we say stuff like that, they're like, oh, you guys want to send us back to, when women weren't allowed to work and they had to wear an apron in the kitchen. It's like it's so disingenuous, this argument. Like no one's saying that. What we're saying is like, you're introducing concepts way too early, and we don't have the social fabric to support these kids anymore. Like families are not together. No one's in church anymore. You don't have strong neighborhoods. You don't have strong communities. Like all of the things that would help if a child found themselves in these situations are not there anymore. And it is a snowball of a bunch of crap, basically, that has taken place over the last 50 years. And it really just breaks my heart. And it makes me so angry when people that are into moving forward and nothing else, like we're just going to steamroll forward. It doesn't matter how bad it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Progressive. Like it kills me. Like they cannot see that this is bad. For kids used to be like the line in the sand, right? Like we can do whatever we want as adults, but kids, like that is the line in the sand. And that is just gone.
And I think it comes back to empowering parents to take it back, because the left is going to keep getting crazy. They're going to keep
absolutely
getting worse. And so we as parents that are into this, we have to start just taking back the education of our children. All right, let's keep going. We're only I think we've only done like 7 minutes.
Again,
it just goes back to the fact that so many of this issue is just not black and white. It really is 50 shades of gray, because like there is just no one size fits all approach to the way we educate our children.
What age do you think sex ed should be taught in schools? Like starting at what age?
Probably at some point during secondary school, because if we're talking about it scientifically, kids need to understand that science is a body of knowledge that we're building together. This is what we currently understand about human anatomy.
As far as like actually getting into intercourse and the details of all of that, in my experience, I usually at least start giving that understanding around 7, 8 years old.
I think that sex ed is a lifelong discussion, and it starts, as soon as you can communicate. Now, that doesn't mean that you are giving a high schooler's curriculum to a 3-year-old, but I'm already talking about consent and using proper anatomical language with my children. And that's where it begins and it ends.
We've always done
in
that.
Adulthood.
I think as long as it happens in a way such that, to the point you were making, that like kids are being protected, that's what I would say we prioritize.
I would
They say that, but that's
go
not
back
what they
to the
do.
way it was when I was in elementary school. They separated the boys and the girls, and the girls watched a video about their period and all these things. The guys watched another video. Yeah, it was health class.
Mm-hmm.
And then we didn't talk about sex education, the actual contraception, all of those things until high school.
I think we need to separate health education from sex education. Health education should be lifelong. No sex ed for now, the way it's being taught in a lot of these states.
See that?
Let's talk a little bit about.
See that? They cut me there. I don't remember what I said in between that. I know I talked about pleasure-based sex. I know and they cut the middle of my statement. They went from me saying health education to sex education, and then there's this pleasure-based sex education that's happening. And I said, no, it should not be happening the way they're doing it in some of these states.
Absolutely.
They introduced pleasure-based sex education into these sex ed classes, and they cut me on that because they wanted to create a narrative that conservatives are against sex education and whatever.
About other things that fall under the responsibility of what teachers do in the classrooms. What is CRT?
Critical race theory in reality is this complex legal institution that relates race to all of the institutions of America since its founding and since its birth. And it's something that I've never learned about in my classroom. I don't have any friends that have learned about it in their classrooms. It's something that's often taught on the graduate level or the undergraduate level. So I think that it's kind of not a great term to use in reference to
verbatim. She's like literally saying verbatim what CNN would say to you, or what if you want to looked up a HuffPost article, what they would say. That's what they all say. It's an undergraduate law school theory that isn't taught in K through 12. Like she just said,
which is where it started.
Well, critical race theory is a theory, and it can be applied without saying the actual critical race theory. And it is being taught in most schools. If you're teaching about white privilege, or if you're teaching about Black children being victims, or if you're teaching about intersectionality and like you're more oppressed if you're a Black lesbian woman than a white male, that's all part of intersectionality. So see critical race theory, but she just said verbatim what
to conversations surrounding K to 12 education, because it's not actually something that's even on the docket for consideration.
That was a perfect description.
I
could not have done a better description if I tried.
It is in our school.
So he says that was a perfect description, and then he's going to totally contradict her now in this next statement. So watch this.
I saw the lessons that contain critical race theory in California.
It said the words critical race.
She thought she had me there. She thought she had me there. She was like, it said the words critical race theory.
You're like, yes.
Yes, it did.
And she's not wrong.
Yeah.
She's not wrong, because some states have implemented CRT into their curriculum.
Now,
it means different.
This guy, again, disingenuous, he now just admits It is in the curriculum. It's in the curriculum.
Things for different districts. So this is about to be a very complicated conversation.
So in my district, and this is in California, they're requiring a class called ethnic studies in order to graduate. And in the class, they were taught about critical race theory. They were taught the definition. They were taught to analyze school policy through critical race theory. And they were taught how critical race theory is beneficial to analyze the US. It's basically like this idea that every institution in America, every institution, that interaction that you have has some sort of element of race. And usually there's a hierarchy of oppressed versus oppressor. And there are kids in America in K through 12 that are being taught that. And I'm so tired of people saying that's not happening when it is. And then when I expose it, I'm being called racial slurs and names for exposing it. And I'm like, come on, guys. Like, so I think we need to stop saying it's not being taught in America and change it to, should it be taught in America? Because it is. There are teachers that are teaching this.
So there's a recent bill that was passed in Texas called Senate Bill 3, and it completely revamped Texas's curriculum standards and basically eliminated all requirements for teaching of history education in Texas that relate to diverse perspectives. So teachers can go through the entirety of K through 12 education without ever talking about slavery as an institution, even though it's thoroughly ingrained into just the history, just the basic facts of America's history.
My understanding, I don't see the banning of slavery being taught in
It's not the banning.
Yeah.
The issue is that it's no longer.
I know that bill.
It's no longer required.
I know that bill, and I know it also states that you're not supposed to teach it in a way that causes mental anguish.
So it does not ban it. It doesn't ban the talking of the institution of slavery, but it does create a loophole for teachers to never touch on the topic at any point in a child's education. And that is something that is happening. And it's something that is happening to peers of mine. It is something that is happening predominantly in communities outside of, I guess, my home city of Dallas, but having traveled and having talked to students across the state of Texas, I can confidently say that there are teachers who are not teaching very key facts of American history because critical race theory conversations have so clouded the teaching of history as an entire whole.
And it's not often called CRT anymore. It's called diversity.
Okay, so what she's saying is, and I'm going to say that there are teachers that feel like they can't talk about slavery anymore, and they're left-leaning teachers. I've seen tantrums that they've had on TikTok or whatever, or Twitter, where they're saying, I don't feel like I can teach about slavery anymore because they're stopping me. I get into my Luna voice because they're stopping me from causing mental anguish. And of course, I'm going to tell the white kids that they have white privilege and that the black kids are victimized and that they're still experiencing institutional racism. And, and so I'm just not going to teach it at all. I'm just not going to teach it at all, and that's what they're doing right now. The left-leaning teachers are like, they're in these right states that are banning critical race theory. And they're going like, I feel like I'm just being silenced right now. I'm being silenced. And so that's what that girl is talking about. And also, there aren't kids every kid is learning about slavery in America.
Yes,
they are, and maybe you could find 0.01% in some really rural area where they're just like, I don't know. I've never seen it first.
Where they're like Christian fundamentalists in every section of the community.
Yeah. But she's just,
it's a straight up lie.
The problem with that girl is that she's in a red state and she's super blue and she's super left leaning and she's had her left leaning teachers and they've probably, told her how horrible it is. And she's just been, turned into activist. She is an activist. And so she has to find these controversies. And if there's like one friend who was like, yeah, they didn't have us claim our white privilege and talk about our intersectionality in the class, then, now all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're not teaching slavery anymore. So
yeah. Can I just say too, I think that this did start in college as a theory. And that has clearly become very problematic in society at large, because you can see it. You can see it even in people that are in our age group, like our generation. You can see how it's affected them from the college level. That's problematic enough. I almost think that it's more problematic now because it's no longer just critical race theory. It's like critical race theory in praxis. So you're like, that's actually more damaging, in my opinion, because it's not just like teaching oh, look at it through this, dissect it through this lens. Like, think of this as a way you need to, think that it could possibly be. There's no maybe going on. It's just like, this is what it is. And there is no, and again, these minds are way more immature than a college level mind. They don't have the ability to say, is my teacher like, maybe there's another way to look at this. They're not thinking about it like that. They just think whatever the teacher tells them is the way that they need to address society. It's really, in 10 years, I don't know what things are going to look like with these poor kids.
They also cut where I asked the teacher with the glasses whether she claims her white privilege to her class. And she said she does. And then I said that takes away from individual stories. And I shared a story about a white girl in middle school who was being told by her teachers that she has white privilege. And she was born as she was a foster child that was found inside of a trailer covered in fleas. And here she's addressing her school board saying, I was being told I have white privilege when I have suffered every type of abuse that a person could suffer. And it made her cry at night to be told she had white privilege. And so I shared this in the Vice panel, and of course they edited that out, but it takes away from individual stories. And the reality is white people aren't even doing the best in America right now. It's actually Indians and Asians, but they never talk about that. They don't want to talk about that. There's Indian people that have browner skin than me. And that's just.
I think Nigerians too, on average, are doing better than
a lot of
white America.
And there's 500,000 Nigerians here in America, and they're killing it. They have their average income is at least 10 G higher than white Americans. Black people, but again, they have to paint these narratives because they want a race war. This is all. There's so much more to this. This new generation of kids that's coming out that's on the left, they're so full of hate for white people, and they're just so angry. And then the Black kids are just like, I'm just a victim and I can't make it in society. And so it's really sad what's going on, but let's keep going.
Equity and inclusion. It's called all these different names and labels because of how divisive of a thing that it is. And I think at the end of the day, the big thing here is that let's teach Black history. No one on the right is saying, do not teach Black history, do not teach slavery. If we forget those lessons of the past, we're bound to repeat them. But what we're also saying is that stop being vindictive towards white people for being white. No one alive today was a slave, and no one alive today owned slaves. And so for white children to sit in a classroom and be blamed for sins that they themselves not commit is wrong. For Black people, for Black children to sit in a classroom and be told that because of the color of your skin, well, it doesn't matter how hard you try, you're really not going to go that far because the society hates you, and then you have all these structural barriers preventing your success. That is also wrong. That is not lessons of hope. That is not lessons of opportunity. And I think that is what schools should be about. You can't create the next generation of leaders if they are never capable of seeing themselves as leaders, right? And I think like that is what CRT, unfortunately, in some ways, it does to young children of color.
What CRT means to me is obviously really different from what it means to you. And when you were saying before, like kids are being anguished, I am not for kids feeling guilty about being born in the body they were born in. That's not what I taught.
What did you teach?
I mean, what did I teach? Well, for one thing, I taught about slavery. For another thing, I taught about like the ripple effects of slavery that we're still feeling today. In no way saying that people of color are less than or can't be, or no, not the opposite. Saying like people have persevered through things that I myself as a white person will never understand.
To really make this micro, the way I see it is there is no reason that kids of a certain age, right, because it's different teaching to a 6-year-old and teaching to a 17-year-old or in college, shouldn't learn about the history of slavery, the history of redlining, the history of Italians being lynched in this country, et cetera, looking at the facts and looking at some of the horrible things that have happened so we can learn from it. That is a totally different conversation than when you've got instances like in Cupertino, California, where you have 7- and 8-year-olds who are being sat down and said, okay, time to do a privilege exercise.
That's what happened in
Let's write out, where you are on the power prism. Because that can create situations where students have warped views of themselves, especially if they're young. And I don't think it's appropriate because of the emotional impact it can have on folks.
If people are actually being sat down being like, if you're white, you're an oppressor and you're bad. That is not okay. That is not CRT. That is not critical race theory. And that is not culturally responsive teaching.
So it's not necessarily being blatantly said, but it's being implied over and over again.
Okay. There is definitely a way to teach CRT without it putting anybody down. But it's like, hey, just so y'all know, if you're interested, there's different types of racism. There's the idea of racism as you treat someone differently because they're a certain color.
Now, I could see him being probably the only left-leaning teacher in America able to teach CRT in like a you're not going to feel bad at the end of this lesson way.
Yeah, totally.
But most of these teachers can't do that, right?
Yeah.
I've seen it, but they found the one who could be like, white privilege is not so bad. Right?
Yeah. He's able to put like a positive spin on like everything.
You can be racist to a white person if you don't like them for being white. Now, there's also systemic racism because we took a whole bunch of slaves from another country and brought them over here. But with that said,
we didn't take, I mean, they took
bought
slaves
them
and put them they were the ones that stole the slaves. Africans stole the slaves, brought them to the coast. And then there was British, Portuguese, and Spanish were the main three people doing that. And they were bringing it here, and then that was just a worldwide thing. But this idea that it was just these kids are being taught that it was just America.
Just America. Yep.
Right? Yep. There's different types of racism here, and you can expose yourself to different ones at different times. But you don't have to make anyone feel bad. You just say the statistics the way they are. You're not saying one person's good, one person's bad. You just go over the definitions.
How should we be teaching race?
Well, I don't think we should be teaching white privilege in the classroom.
But teaching about race, like if you're, designing your ideal, setting.
Yeah, I think.
How do you think race should be?
Is that because you think it doesn't exist, or because they can't handle it, or like?
I think again, when it comes to the privilege discussion, like that's a great conversation for you to have with your child. But I don't think that taxpayer-funded hatred should be something that we allow in our schools.
Okay, bro. Real talk though, like brother to brother, teaching white privilege does not inherently mean Black people
don't understand
are
that.
less. Factually incorrect, right? So
what is white privilege?
Privilege is the idea of white people may have benefits that fall in a societal structure. Because they are white, they have advantages, such as, for example, if you send out a resume and you make one name a white name and the other name the classic.
What's a white name?
The white name was John, for example, right?
I know Black John.
Okay, no, hear me out. Let me finish, okay? We did a study. I didn't do this study, but we did a study where basically it was sent out 2 different resumes. They were the exact same.
They love this.
Right?
Study.
One was given a classic white name. The other was given the name Jamal.
Okay.
The white name got 2 times more callbacks.
And
right?
I disagree with what you're saying.
But the idea of white privilege, right? The idea that some.
Okay. So I want to go into this study that he's talking about because this is their favorite thing to say. There's systemic racism in America because we did a study where we sent out applications of white names and Black names. And we found out that, and he was wrong in this. He actually cited this wrong. This was misinformation. I want you to, Kiana, what % do you think? So they were basically seeing how many callbacks would happen versus the white names versus the Black names. And yes, there was more callbacks for white names versus Black names. What do you think was the % on that? What would be your guess?
Like over the other?
Yes.
I don't know, maybe 2 or 3?
Yeah, so it was 2%. All right. So I read the whole study. It was done in UC Berkeley. And they did a study where they sent out all of these applications to 100 companies, Fortune 500 companies or whatever, 100 of them. And they had half the resumes were Black names and half the resumes were white names. And they sent it out, and 2% there was 2% less callbacks for Black names. And you would be like, okay, so first of all, 2% is pretty small, right? That's pretty small. Now, if you look deeper into the study, and I would say, okay, there's maybe some bias or whatever there. If you look deeper into the study, so I'm reading all 100 pages of the study because I've seen the left use this talking point over and over again. A Black name gets discriminated. Guess where they got the names? They got it from North Carolina arrest records.
Nice.
So they used the most ghetto sounding without being, Black names, right? And then they got the last names from the Census Bureau. So why didn't they use Black names from the Census Bureau, which might have been less I would say that every name that they sent out for Black women was like LaShonda, LaWanda.
Yeah.
So they used arrest record Black names from North Carolina as the names. And then also they did actually most of the companies did not even discriminate based on the names. There was no discrimination. It was actually only 20 of the 100 companies that had most of the discrimination, right? And of those 20, most of it was in the auto service industry, the auto dealership industry. And they did not say which dealerships or which big auto places did they send these resumes to? I read the whole study and you didn't see where they sent those. They didn't share the exact companies that they sent these resumes to. So it was basically auto industry and clothing industries. Everything else, even like engineering and all the other places they sent these resumes to, had no bias for Black versus white names, even with the most ghetto Black names like Lawanda and stuff like that. And sorry if you have that name, but that's just, it's that connotation comes with it. It was North Carolina Arrest Records where they got the names. So it was two industries that had the most amount of discrimination. They were the bulk of the study that caused the 2%, right? And if you think about auto dealerships, where did they send it to? Did they send it to Ford? Because what happened was, if you look at the individual names, you can actually look up the individual names. There was two names that had the highest callbacks, and that was white names, Misty and Heather. Because they wanted a pretty face. And these were jobs that were under, they were AA. You didn't have to have a degree. They were like not high level jobs. They didn't want to do high level jobs because that actually doesn't happen. And so so it was Misty and Heather, which was the most hired names, right? And then actually the name that got hired the least, that was the least chosen name, not hired, but called back name, was Jeffrey on the white side. And they didn't mention that Jeffrey on the white side actually was the most. So I don't know what it is, but people don't like Jeffries on the white side if you look at the graphs. And then here's my final point. If you were a Black name and you put LGBTQ on it, somehow like you were a member of a rainbow club, the discrepancy went completely away. So that's interesting to think of too, because a Black name with an LGBTQ thing going on it, discrepancy is gone. So here's all the things that's wrong with the study. It was 2% for one. He said it wrong. He said 2 times. No, it was 2%. Secondly, they chose names from North Carolina arrest records. So what kind of names are you going to get as Black names? That's why Phil was saying, I know Black Johns. They went for like the most, and then the most discriminated against name was Jeffrey from the white side. They didn't mention that They didn't mention that because people aren't willing to read these studies. They have headlines of this study everywhere. And if you put LGBTQ on your application, that discrepancy, that 2% discrepancy disappeared. So it's a junk study. Like, that is not a good example of systemic racism in this country because it's just a junk study that was obviously screwed. They also didn't share which companies they sent these resumes to. Were they sending Black resumes to Abercrombie and Fitch or whatever with the name Yolanda on it? And Heather got hired instead because that's that brand, right?
That's their market base.
Were they sending it to Cadillac or were they sending it to Ford for the auto industry? Because they said it was in the auto industry and the clothing industry for like front of house type jobs. Because the auto industry service didn't have that problem. It was only auto industry dealership.
Right. The sales.
Yeah. So I'm just like, you guys, you leftists, man, you guys can just eat up some narratives and put
there's
that
so much
all over.
nuance to these studies, like that no one's interested in.
No.
What I always find really interesting too, with this particular conversation with jobs, we hear all the outrage about like Black and white hiring discrepancies, whatever. No one ever talks about gender discrepancies, and no one has a problem with that. Like, I can guarantee you, if you are looking at applications for like wait staff, they're going to hire 9 girls out of 10 applications and do maybe 1 dude. Because why? They want women servicing and being waitresses. That's what they want. They're going to put all the dudes in the back and the cook line and put all the girls in the dining room. No one has a problem with that.
Yeah. And then actually the number one type of discrimination in this country is age discrimination. That's the number one type of, if there is
for jobs,
an oppressed class, it's older people that are older. They get discriminated against a lot for jobs. All right, let's keep going. We've got 10 minutes left. Let's try and get through this in 20 minutes. Let me put it on the screen.
somebody that is white maybe have an advantage does not inherently mean you are teaching a Black individual they cannot accomplish great things. That is completely separate. So we're talking about fake biological science and social science. We're not even in the same building at school right now.
Well, again, in regards to these like audit studies about like what is a white name, it's not necessarily that the name itself is white. It's that the perceiver, the person that is reading the resumes, for some strange reason, feels like when they see a white name that they are on their team, or that there are positive stereotypes associated with people being white. That's what we're talking about when we talk about white privilege, is that, okay, if Oprah goes into a store, people might not assume that she can afford the things in that store because she's a Black woman, even though she is Oprah. But if someone was white and goes into the same store, some people, because of their own racial stereotypes, might believe that they can afford it. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about white privilege, is the sort of systemic benefits that you get from society.
No, I want to add, though, what you're describing, though, is discrimination. But to call it privilege, when the reality is, let's say you take the white person who would be considered white trash, you would get the same result from them. So I don't think you can necessarily assume that that's because of race, and definitely can't call it systemic because of personal decision to be discriminatory.
He has a really good point here, because I had a friend, he was like this super like gangster white guy. And he was just like always getting in trouble. And I love him. He was like, he has kids now and he's older, but like he was just, the cops were always on him because he was like flashing gang signs and sagging his pants and like cigarette in his mouth and like
presenting himself
exactly. And he was always having trouble with the cops, always, because he was like smoking on the cliffs, and back when marijuana wasn't allowed to be everywhere, right? And he was it's the way you present yourself. Like Oprah is not going to get discriminated against in a store. No Black woman who's dressed in a classy way. I think dress changes a lot of way people perceive you. Like if you come in and you're dressed like really nicely, doesn't matter what race you are, you're going to get helped more. If you look rich, like I would say there's more discrimination based on that. But if you're being followed in a store and you have your pants sagging and you're just like acting all crazy and whatever, sorry, but that's just, or you're young, because actually 1 in 10 people currently right now, I actually looked up the statistics, 1 in 10 people are stealing still, especially young people.
Right.
And so that is a common thing. People are stealing stuff. So it's like, okay, oh, well, and the thing is that really hurting you? No, like you can just be like, hey, I'm not doing anything. Like I remember being followed in the store when I was like 14. I don't get followed in the store now anymore. But like when you're 14, 15, you get followed in the store because, especially when you're with a group of girls, because for one, my friends were stealing.
I was stealing. That's why I was getting followed.
Yeah, I wasn't a big stealer. It scared me. I remember my friend convinced me to steal once, and it scared me. And
I got caught on my first time, and honestly, I'm so glad that I did, because I probably would have been emboldened to keep doing it.
Yeah.
What I was going to say too about the corporate, let's say, for instance, we're talking about like discrimination on a corporate level, right? And you've got some, I don't know, corporate CEO or something. I think we confuse systemic discrimination with just the fact that some people just suck. Like no one's going to pretend that there's not some old gray-haired racist white dude out there that owns a company. They exist. Okay. No one's saying that racism is not a thing that exists. What we're saying is it is on an individual basis. It is not just flowing through society writ large, so someone somewhere is going to be able to find some anomaly where some rich white dude doesn't like anybody who doesn't look like him and doesn't want to hire anybody but white people. That's not, it doesn't give an example of the entire population of corporate America. It just does not. Like you're going to have those one-offs because people suck sometimes. Just what it is.
And the thing is, there's Black industries and Black institutions that are doing just that and being celebrated for it. So like BET, for example, we just had the BET Awards. Do we have like a white people awards? Like that would
the
never
country would be
allowed.
On fire if we did that.
Exactly. Like let's do this study. Let's do this study again and have a bunch of white people apply to like these BET and like FUBU or I don't know other Black brands. I'm like from the 90s, so like, but what would happen? Would the Black person get chosen or the white person? I mean, and that's totally allowed. You're allowed to do that in America right now. You can have Black only spaces and literally put up a sign and be like, this is the Black only space.
Yeah.
And no white people allowed, or no, this is a people of color space. And that's
Yeah.
totally celebrated by the left.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
Should it be taught to our children?
Right.
And should it be, and should we be telling Black kids that you're going to get discriminated against because of the color of your skin, with loans, with redlining, blah, blah, blah?
There is a way to teach culturally responsive teaching without being narrow-minded, but it's hard. But just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Even if you talk about the systems in place that that
they cut me off right there. I don't remember what I said, but I finished my thought on that, and then they didn't. And they cut me off.
Privilege different groups at different times in different spaces. I'm not saying that when you teach CRT, when you teach about the history of this country that has privileged certain groups and
also, I want to quickly mention redlining. That is, Asians actually are getting loans at a way higher rate than white people. So does that mean they have Asian privilege, or does that mean they just have better credit scores?
They have better credit.
Yes.
Let me tell you, I've worked in the finance industry since 2008 now. Okay. I've been in it for a long time, and I've been on the lending piece of it for quite a big chunk of that time I've been in the financial industry. And it is literally illegal to discriminate based on race. It is 100% illegal. And it's not to say there are anomalies and there might be someone out there doing it, but it's such a risk to do that, because if you get found out you did that, your company will get sued, rightly so. You can't just discriminate based on someone's color of their skin. What is happening is it's discriminating based on credit, which is how it works. That's the way it goes. I don't even know why this is like, a discussion that like shocks people. Like, you get discriminated on based on your credit, period.
Well, it's because of white people that Black people have bad credit. You didn't know
that? Yeah. Sorry. I'm sorry.
You didn't know that, Q?
Not privileged Black people. I think it's important to acknowledge that Black people have persevered throughout that. There's so much excellence. And I think that you do all kids a disservice when you say, okay, the history of Black people in this country, or the history of women in this country, is that they were oppressed the whole time and they weren't resisting. And then the Civil War happens, and the slaves are freed, and the Black people just stopped resisting, economic injustice until the Civil Rights Movement. That is not the case of history in this country. And so I feel like it's very important, if you're teaching about, race in this country, it's about resistance. It's about resistance to the power structure that suggests that some people deserve to get more if they work hard than another group of people if they work the same level.
And not just resistance, but
We're
resilience.
not working the same level. Sorry, guy. I mean, I hate to break it to you, but Black America, we had the fastest economic growth from like the 20s to the 60s, fastest economic growth in the US.
During Jim Crow.
And then, and this is a whole other video because this is getting long.
Yeah.
But then things changed this last 50 years. It's really become a lot of attacks on Black America within and without. And I will say, and I've never been someone to say there's no systemic racism, because I do think there is, and it's on the side of the left. And that's a whole nother, the Democrat side is constantly working to bring down and weaponize Black America. That is their goal. It's part of the communist agenda. And that's a whole nother video. But the fact that we can't work as hard as the white man and we'll never get the same or whatever, that's such a myth. Like, they're teaching that to our children right now.
Yeah.
Too. And it's just, I mean, half of what he said was right. And then the second half just went down.
Right. You mentioned history, and a lot of you are educators. I'm just curious, what do you think should or shouldn't be taught, when it comes to US history in the K through 12 environment?
So I think it's just this really unbalanced way that they're teaching it right now, especially the ones that are proponents of CRT, that's creating this narrative that it's all white people to blame, when there was so many people involved in the transatlantic slave trade. The British were actually the ones.
So they cut me off right there. They cut off all the middle that I said. I talked about how there was Cherokee that owned slaves in America, which they never teach to the children. They never teach children that the Cherokee Indians owned Black slaves. They don't teach that to kids. They were actually part of the Trail of Tears, in fact, which is sad. But they also don't teach. And the Cherokee also didn't free the slaves during the 13th Amendment. The Cherokee waited. They had the white people actually had to convince them to free the slaves, and they didn't let the slaves' descendants be members of their tribe until like this last 5 years.
Interesting.
So that's something that they don't teach kids. And they also don't teach children about how there were free blacks that owned slaves. There was a free black man that owned over 100 slaves. And they don't teach that to children. There was over 10,000 black slaves that were owned by black people. And I say this in this statement, and they just immediately cut me to the British part where I talk about how the British were the ones to actually stop the slave trade. And people in the comments are like, well, they started the fire and now they go and turn off the fire. And she thinks that that's something good, right? Actually, they didn't start the fire. The transatlantic slave trade was around before the British even got involved. It was started by the Spanish and the Portuguese, and then there were Arabs that were taking Africans from the coast even before that, and they were like horrifically brutal. And I'm not saying that this wasn't a good time in our history, like it was, but we still have slavery today. Our slavery is just overseas now. All of our clothes are made by slave wages. Most of our clothes are these people are being paid 30 cents an hour and working 12-hour days, and they don't even get free housing. So they cut me out, and they didn't let me make all those points, because of course they don't want their precious indigenous, Cherokee, the indigenous. Oh my gosh, they were owning slaves too. Whoa, like they can't expose that.
You know what I think is so unfortunate too, when we don't talk about the fact that it ended in this country. Like, that's such a victory that happened. Like, no one's going to pretend, number one, that it didn't happen. Number two, that there weren't repercussions for it happening. Clearly there were, which is why things like affirmative action were put in place. Like, there's good reasons for some of these things, because we can look back and see, okay, you're going to have some repercussions for these things that took place. But the fact that we never celebrate the fact that it ended, and people want to argue like, oh, well, Lincoln only did it to keep the country together. Okay, even if that's true, which that's a wishy-washy argument anyways, but even let's say hypothetically that is 100% factually true, it still ended. Like, it's still something to celebrate, like that we were the first country to do that.
It was our bloodiest war to date too.
It was horrible.
Yeah. 500,000 men, about 200,000 people from the North that were fighting. And everyone knew, even though it was, to keep the State of the Union, but everyone knew that means slavery too. That means slavery too. That means that was going to end. And so let's keep going. We're almost done.
Ones that stopped it and used their own resources to stop the slave trading ships from continuing. They went to Africa to stop them. Hey, stop bringing them to the coast because we're not buying them anymore. And so this idea that I just feel bad for our children because they're not being taught it in a perspective that is holistic, basically.
And even to this day, there are slaves in Libya held captive by black people. So this is not a white and black issue. But even with that said, I think leaving the public school system, even my peers, I mean, when we talk about this,
there's literally black slaves right now enslaved. There's children on cocoa farms and lithium farms that are in slavery right now.
All those precious EVs that everybody's demanding from the left.
We eat the stuff. We eat the chocolate. And it's done by child slave labor. And yet we're just like, we had slavery 150 years ago, so we need reparations. We weren't even part of that, but let me have my Twix bar that was off the back of a child slave on the coast of Africa right now. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
We left with the idea that Black history is slavery and Jim Crow. And we're rarely talking about the Reconstruction era, the amount of senators and politicians we had post-slavery. It was just so many things that we did after slavery that we're being told we can't do today somehow. That is just asinine.
There's no conservative America who's saying don't teach slavery in the classrooms. But if you're going to talk about slavery, to his point, let's talk about Madam C.J. Walker. Let's talk about George Washington Carver. Let's talk about all these black people who have done some really incredible things that, in spite of quote unquote systemic racism and all of these things, have achieved. Let's talk about Barack Obama. Let's talk about Kamala Harris. Why is every conversation that we have to have about black?
And if you've made it this far in our video and you're still with me, my school, Exodus Institute, we go into these stories. I have a lesson on George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington, both born slaves, born into slavery, and both went from the bottom. I mean, the bottom as bottom could get, to being extremely successful men who were also amazing examples for Black America. And their theory was, back then they were just like, leave us alone. We don't want handouts from the government. We don't want, government correction. Just let us rise on our own. And you will see it since since the 60s, when the government started intervening in a lot of this stuff. That's when Black America stopped being prosperous, stopped being the fastest economic growth group in America. So yeah, if you want to check out my school, you can go to thinkexodus.org. It's an online school, and my enrichment lessons, which are 5th through 12th grade, are only $20 a month. And I do lessons with the students. I mean, I record the lessons, and they have activities they have to do, and there's worksheets, and I grade the worksheets myself. I'm not even making anything on it because I have 60 students in my enrichment program at $20 a month. So it's a lot of work but my reward is seeing these kids turn in their lessons. I need to advertise my school more. I need to get better on that, but they are not teaching these stories to our kids anymore. In fact, during Black History Month at my former district, they put up posters of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor in the halls, as opposed to George Washington Carver and Madam C.J. Walker.
People in the classroom about us being in chains, downtrodden, and having no hope. That's a problem. And Black History Month, it's American history. Let's talk about that too. Those are important inspirational stories that are not taught in the classroom.
Do you think that the fight against CRT is hurting the efforts for more diversity and inclusion?
I don't want diversity and inclusion.
I mean, we already have that. What I mean by that is you said you want more Black stories of hope and success and all of that. That's what I mean.
But that's unfortunately not what CRT is.
Yeah. I know.
That's actually exactly what CRT is.
I think what's really clear is there's a lot of big opinions on education, across the spectrum, and really thankful to all of you for sharing, your perspectives, where you're coming from. Some of you said it wasn't like this when you were kids. 20 years ago, school was really different. Maybe you couldn't even imagine having some of these conversations. So just want to pose the question to you, and where do we go from here?
I believe that we have to recontextualize the way that we approach education as a society, and specifically how we've kind of started.
Chicago and Detroit, we don't need to be even having a conversation about whether or not students should be learning about privilege in schools.
The number one policy thing that I come back to that we must do to improve K through 12 education is to put in school choice at a universal level. It's far too overdue. It will incentivize the public schools to fix a lot of the problems that they have. It'll put the power back into the parent to get their child an education that best meets their needs. And I do think that if we're going to build the best generation of young people, then we should start with teaching them tolerance, kindness, and active listening before we get into racial privilege theory, gender privilege theory, etc.
I think that it's so important to get back to critical thinking and understanding that the way that we raise the next generation is also, not necessarily staying fixed ourselves. I think you were saying that, your wife is learning with the kids. And if we continue to learn about, hey, how do we do this better for ourselves? How do we treat each other better? The more that we do that, the better that we will be able to collaborate with people we disagree with, the better that we'll be able to make a curriculum that actually does, speak about the excellence that you're able to do if you, continue to challenge yourself and strive and push forward.
On this panel, a really huge set of diverse opinions. There wasn't really a bad guy. We all wanted the same thing at the end. We just had different ways to get there. So I just think the collaboration is really what I'm taking away, because you can collaborate with anyone.
I think we need to make sacrifices for our children's future and prioritize them a bit more today. Aside from that, if you choose a public school route, I'm all for the collaborative effort. But what that needs to look like is parents showing up to the PTA meetings, showing up to the school board meetings, knowing and being inside the classroom and being actively involved, regardless of which route you take.
I think we put too much faith into the education of our children in public education, when we should be doing more of that ourselves. And we need to make sure that we put more power into the parents and empower them to take control of their child's education.
We just need to stop burning down the house. I truly believe that we can save public ed if we stop arguing with each other and start pouring more resources and really buckling down to save this thing that really in turn saves us as a society. We can do it. We just need to stop chasing all of these boogeymans.
They're not boogeymen.
That we are just kind of seeing in the media just to polarize everybody and make everybody so angry. We need to stop that and save what we have, because what we have can be great and we need it.
imagine thinking that like these books that they're letting in the schools that are super disgusting, right?
Yeah.
Are just boogeymans that we're chasing, and we need to just set it aside and just let it happen because it's just, we're almost there.
I think that will do it for us. Thank you all so much for taking your time and for sharing your opinions and being so respectful of each other. Really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
We did it.
You did it. You passed.
Let's go.
Now what?
We get the awards for best panel, and then we get our picture taken.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was amazing.
I learned something on the education panel today.
I live in somewhat of an echo chamber, so to be
That's
able to
very
break
classic me doing the.
Totally is 100%.
Oh, that's funny.
free from that, to learn from new people, learn from new perspectives, was really honestly a great experience.
Critical theory should not replace critical thinking.
There's a panelist who believes that, there is a place for critical race theory within our schools. I don't believe that.
What I hope for the future of education is we have parents more involved with their children's education and future.
Smile fight
is like when someone says a point you disagree with, but you can't quite, it's like,
yeah. Like, yeah.
I would totally trust my future kids and my current
No, he
students.
would. He's fake.
See,
No, you don't have to say the same. You don't have to say the same thing.
So that's it. All right. So
Didn't you tell me you said something to him there? Like, I don't trust anybody with my kids.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I said, just one vice conversation wouldn't make me trust you with my kids. And I want to teach my own kids. And then the producers were like, but he has, I have my own school. I don't need to have another teacher teach my kids. And they were like, but he has a school. And I'm like, yeah, so I want my kids in my school. They took that all out, but it was, and the way he said, like, I would totally trust, like, he obviously hasn't gone on my TikTok yet. I'm sure he doesn't feel the same way now. But yeah, that's it. That was the Vice panel. I will come back and do some more lives. I'm going to do some more lives. I know I haven't even done one where it's like, hey, ask me questions and stuff like that. I'm still getting used to this, and I will do some more of that. I'm just super hungry right now, just kind of how I was hungry after the Vice panel. But thank you guys so much for being here, and I'm going to try and set up a regular time to do lives. Thank you for the super chats, those of you that sent those. Thank you, Q, for being here and doing this with me. Hour and a half. We did a 3 hours, because with part 1 and part 2, it was 3 hours. But I feel vindicated in that I was at least able to share all of what happened with me on that panel. And I had someone tell me today, like, don't do those panels again. You have too good of a following to do that. That's beneath you.
Nah, because I will share with you guys, when I was with her in New York when she did this, right? So I picked her, we got back together after she was done with the panel, and I was all day, I was like anticipating how she was going to be after, because I was like, okay, clearly she's in unfriendly territory. Like, we all know what Vice is. So I was really anxious all day long. And honestly, Kali, you were like, it was really, really good. Like, I feel like, I feel really positive about it. Like, you came out of it feeling like it was not 100% toxic. Mm-hmm. Like, there was good conversation. You're like, clearly we disagreed about 1,000,001 things, but you seemed to be energized from it, honestly, and not like defeated.
Yeah. And that's part of it was what I had done 2 weeks before, which was being on a major talk show. And it was like the worst experience of my life. They have not aired the episode yet. I did okay, but I don't know if they're going to air the episode, but this in contrast to that. So the #1 daytime talk show, if you guys want to guess which one it was, I did a critical race theory episode, and it was me against a woke professor that was the most pompous jerk. And it was so hard, and the whole audience was against me, and it was like a nightmare. So I went from that to this, which was much more friendly. And I think that really made a huge difference. But I will try and do a live that's more casual, and I'll probably do that sometime this week. So thank you, JC, for asking that. I should do one where I'm going to answer questions and stuff like that. But thank you, Q, for being here. God bless all of you. And if you stayed through this whole thing, you're a super fan. No, you're a super friend. You're a super friend. All right. God bless you guys. Bye.
Good night.